I think I'm going to start because I know for some of us it's going to be 5 o'clock and I may not be done if I wait too much longer. So anyone who joins may miss a little bit at the beginning, but I think this is going to be archived so it can be watched again. So I know some of you, for those of you that don't know, I'm Daryl Greenfield. I'm a professor at the University of Miami and a co-PI on this new elementary science center, CAESART. A couple of my colleagues are on as well. For some reason, I can't see the chat, so I guess you can put in questions in chat. Maybe Reagan will.
Yeah,
Let's,
definitely. There's nothing there yet, Daryl, but thanks. I'll keep an eye on it, okay?
I'll try to get this, go over this in about 45 minutes or so, and then leave time for questions. And so what I'm planning on covering today is, first of all, a review of these national efforts to make science and engineering education a much greater focus of early childhood education. And there's various ways of thinking about it, but typically people think about early childhood as going from birth to around age 8, which is infants, toddlers, preschool, and the early elementary grades. And then going to spend a little bit of time talking about why is there this focus on science for early childhood education? And then I'll spend some time, and Reagan may join me on this new Center for Advancing Elementary Science through Assessment, Research, and Technology, which we have called the nice word CAESART or CAESART, depending upon how you're going to make the C. And so to start with, there's been a very, very long history at the national level and trying to make science more prominent in early childhood. And this actually started thinking about high school students and why they take AP classes in the sciences and then go off to college and don't do very well. The AP group started looking into it. And the group for younger kids, like kindergarten through 8th grade, said, why are we just focusing on thinking about science in high school? We should think about it in the K-8 system. So a group was put together and a National Academy's consensus volume was published in 2007 entitled Taking Science to School, Focus on Learning and Teaching Science in Grades K-8. And the focus is, what is the problem with how science is being taught in K-8? And I don't have time to go over this in detail, but the basic notion was that we were teaching science in a very rote, memorizing fashion, completely disconnected from students' everyday lives. And each topic area was disconnected from each other. So you would typically spend 7 or 8 weeks trying to learn how to solve certain word problems. Students who were bright could do that. They didn't really see how this was relevant to their everyday life. And then a new topic would be introduced that had nothing to do with the prior topic. And the concern about why we're not getting enough bright students to go into the STEM fields sort of originated from how we were teaching science. Like, who wants to take time and effort in creating a career that seems so boring and irrelevant to everyday lives? But the link to early childhood was the fact that although this group that wrote this report was commissioned to cover K-8, they put an entire chapter in this volume talking about why kindergarten is too late to start. So what basically happened over the next 5 or so years is that the framework, this new framework for K-12 science education was published, and at the national level with the idea and hope that the states would adopt this. And what the new framework says is we have to stop teaching science in a very rote fashion, in a disconnected way. But instead, and the other thing that was described, was that it was a content area that was basically a mile wide and an inch deep. So people who were learning science in the K-12 system were learning lots and lots of facts about various things that were completely disconnected and no in-depth understanding. So what the framework says, let's limit the content to no more than 2 to 4 big ideas in the traditional 3 areas of science: life science, physical science, earth and space science. And let's add engineering as the 4th disciplinary content area, because we want students to understand the application of science, not just the principles. And this knowledge has to be acquired by engaging the students in active learning, so using and acquiring scientific practices, and the topic content in each area as well as across areas needs to be connected. And the third piece is what's referred to as cross-cutting concepts. So what we ended up doing when we saw this transformation was thinking about what happens in the first 5 years of life. Do students do something very similar, or are we going to teach infants, toddlers, and preschool kids in a very different way and then make, this leap to something totally different in the K-12 system? So what we decided to do was to link birth to age 5 to this K-12 science framework, and we did that by creating what we have called the early science framework, which is the birth to 5 adaptation of this particular framework. And again, it's these three critical interactions of what are children interested in. And when you start looking at that, that's these disciplinary core ideas, a small set of big ideas in life science, physical science, earth and space science, engineering, and technology. How does this content need to be learned? Not by memorizing, but by engaging the students in asking and answering questions, by doing the practices, the behaviors that children engage in to explore and develop knowledge. And what are the children trying to understand? They're trying to understand these big ideas that emerge and generalize across content, creating this much more coherent view of the world. So these cross-cutting concepts. And then the next major thing that happened was in 2016 during the Obama administration, when he sponsored a White House summit in which he invited representatives from communities around the country who initially put in a short abstract on how they were going to increase a focus of STEM in early childhood in their communities. And they spent a day at the White House where a small group of us sort of led the sessions. And the press release for this summit says, research indicates that as early as infancy, young children are already starting to develop and test hypotheses for how the world around them works. They understand probability, they make predictions, they take in information from trusted sources around them, and they use that information to guide their behavior. And that all begins in the first year of life. As they progress through the preschool years, their curiosity continues to grow, and their sophistication of their reasoning and inquiry skills grow along with it. And when you sort of think about this is, again, not something that all of a sudden appears in 2016. Some of you may have seen this 1999 book, The Scientist in the Crib, What Early Learning Tells Us About the Mind. And argument is that 90% of a child's brain development is occurring early on. Millions of neural connections are formed, and children actually learn much like scientists do. And the next thing that happened was that in 2017, a group of us published a policy report focusing on early STEM matters. The word matters has two meanings to it, and thinking about what do we know about STEM in early childhood, and where we would like to head, where we'd like to be. And the report, which is available on my website, which I'll share with you, has 4 guiding principles, which are, in essence, overarching conceptual commitments about young children and STEM education. But it's not just about STEM. These principles generally reflect best practices for early childhood education that are often overlooked or forgotten in STEM education. We also had a series of 6 recommendations, but the guiding principles start out by saying children who have sort of this natural inclination to do STEM, and we'll talk about that, they cannot do this on their own. They need adults to develop their natural STEM inclination. So adults play a critical role in young children's learning, as they do in elementary school and ideally through life. Representation and communication, so drawing, talking, doing language. So not just learning, but using representation and communication are going to be central to STEM learning. And it's not just that the adults have to help the children, but they have to have positive attitudes and beliefs about STEM, because that affects their children's beliefs and attitudes. If you go around saying math is hard, STEM is science and engineering are too difficult, you shouldn't be doing this, only boys have aptitude. If you're a girl, don't waste your time. These sorts of beliefs and attitudes really affect the attitudes of the children. And then lastly, there's often a notion that everyone can learn STEM in exactly the same way, but it's not the case. And STEM education is really not culturally neutral. It depends on culture. It depends on context and so forth. The next thing that happened was that in 2022, a group of us published a National Academy's consensus volume, Science and Engineering in Preschool through elementary grades. If you have never been involved or know about these consensus reports, it's called a consensus report because there is a wide variety of committee members that write this report. When you see this, these are researchers and preschool and elementary grades. There are practitioners, there are people in school systems, and everyone has to agree to every single word in this. So it's a consensus volume. It's not someone or a small group of people's opinion, it's everyone. And then after we finish what is our quote sort of final version, it gets sent out to a group of independent reviewers who end up reading it and making decisions about, your recommendations, which all have to be research-based. Some of these have gone a little bit too far. You need to back off a little bit, but some of these other ones, you could probably say more about what you think should happen. So the consensus volume, which we subtitled The Brilliance of Children, the Strength of Educators, is oriented towards the present. So the present one can think about is that all children deserve to experience the wonder of science and the satisfaction of engineering. So they should be doing this. Children are also deeply curious and goal-directed, motivated to learn about and understand their world. And there are opportunities to ask and answer authentic questions and to solve real-world problems that are meaningful and important to the children at whatever age they are, infants, toddlers, preschoolers. And the report is not just oriented towards the present, it's also oriented towards the future. So thinking about creating a solid foundation for later success, enthusiasm, knowledge, skills, concepts, becoming an informed decision maker, being able to access high-paying and rewarding STEM-related careers, and involving them in a broader range of identities and backgrounds. So the consensus volume, which is available for free on the National Academies of Press, you can download a version or you can buy one if you want a physical copy, has 18 evidence-based recommendations. I obviously don't have time to go into all of them, but I'll give you 4 of them. Why science and engineering needs to be a critical focus in early childhood. Enacting the vision of the framework for K-12 science education. So let's learn science the way this new framework says, a small set of big ideas by engaging the students and actively doing and thinking about what they're learning so the concepts can be integrated across content area and make it authentic in terms of what children and students in K-12 and we start at birth are interested, the questions they have, and the problems that they are interested in solving because they're relevant for them. Greater alignment and coherence from preschool into the elementary grades and beyond. And then thinking about integrating science and engineering with other academic areas. For example, language and literacy and so forth. We have an entire chapter on integration talking about not just the advantages, but the potential pitfalls. You just can't do it. You have to do it in a way that actually enhances both. So what you're doing with science and engineering and language and literacy, they're both positively benefiting each other in a bi-directional way. And when we wrote the volume, we were thinking like, when you pick up this volume, what is the first sentence that you should read? And, you have this novelty effect. And the first sentence is part of why it's important now is every child deserves to experience the wonder of science and the satisfaction of engineering. And then in 2024, last year, the Academy's published a practitioner guide entitled Rise and Thrive with Science. So the consensus volume is very research oriented, lots of recommendations. But if you're a practitioner, you're not going to pick up a 500-page volume and read it, but rather this is for practitioners. And what it does is it uses cases and shorter examples and shows what high quality teaching and learning in science and engineering can look like from preschool and in the elementary grades. The guide also discusses the kinds of support that educators need to implement effective and equitable instruction for all children, and provides inspiration for practitioners both at the preschool and elementary levels to try new strategies for science and engineering education, whatever their level of experience. You don't have to be an expert. Jump in. The water's nice and warm. And then the last thing that had happened, which was last fall, and I'll go into this in much greater detail after I talk about like why science early childhood, was a joint funding by the Institute for Education Sciences and the National Science Foundation for a brand new, first time ever elementary science center. We titled it the Center for Advancing Elementary Science Through Assessment, Research, and Technology. It's led by EDC, the Education Development Center. Megan Solander, who's a key member of that group, is the principal investigator. There are a series of co-principal investigators, both within EDC and the partner institutions, which is the University of Miami, where I am at, the National Center for Research on Evaluation Standards and Student Testing, CREST, at University of California, LA, and the Lawrence Hall of Science at University of California, Berkeley. And we have a project advisory board. You can see there's a variety of people, very experienced researchers, as well as people working in elementary schools. And we're in the process of currently creating a practitioner advisory board as well. So I want to say a little bit about, there's been this national effort, and the question is like, why? With so many competing interests, concerns, and important topics to learn in early childhood, why focus on science and engineering? Why make this so foundational? What's, the big deal? Why this major national effort for 15 or so years? And I'm going to very quickly talk about how theories of child development that actually get applied in early education practices in schools are highly relevant to science, and then also talk about some of the evidence that applies for this. So there's lots of theories that relate. I obviously don't have time to talk about a lot of them, so I'm going to quickly highlight Piaget, which I'm sure most of you heard of, Vygotsky, and then Michel Chouinard. So in terms of Piaget, what is the essence of Piaget's theory? So Piaget says that children's development occurs internally, inside their heads, through their active engagement with their environment. So what would be the role of an adult, or what should you look for when you're in early childhood classrooms? You should look for the adult providing the child with stimulating, novel environments to explore. It might not be your refrigerator, but we want to have them engaged in stimulating novel exploration of stimulating novel environments. For Vygotsky, it's a very different sort of approach. So Vygotsky is not necessarily inside the child's head, internally structuring schema, but rather views this as a process in which adults scaffold children into what he calls the zone of proximal development. Zone is an area, proximal means close, carefully guiding each step in a hands-on apprenticeship fashion. So when the child is getting frustrated and getting stuck, the adult helps them, doesn't tell them what's next, but helps them move into this new zone that's adjacent but not right within their reach. So for Vygotsky, the adults must know the sequence of steps that children follow in learning a new skill. And unlike Piaget, where you can create an environment and sort of step back, the role of adults in Vygotsky's approach is highly interactive, scaffolding the child into his or her zone of proximal development. Okay, and then as a last example, Michelle Chouinard in 2007 wrote a monograph for SRCD entitled Children's Questions, a Mechanism for Cognitive Development. And what the monograph is about, do children ask questions? And if they do, why? Why do they ask questions? So, do children ask questions? If yes, what is the content and focus of these questions? And in the monograph, she provides multiple studies with both small and large groups of children to answer these questions. So one of her studies is one where she takes transcripts of naturally occurring parent-child spontaneous questions for 4 children, 1 to 5 years of age. These are these sort of baby biographies. And she counts for each of these, how many questions did they ask their parents, starting when they're able to talk, in 1 hour. And maybe I'll pause for a minute and let you think about, is this 5? Is this 10? Is it 20? Is it 30? How many questions do you think a child who's first learning to talk asks a parent in 1 hour? Okay, hopefully you come up with your answer. How many people thought it was like somewhere around 100? So 70, almost 200, a little over 100 is the average. So children are asking when they first talk. So like we're starting at, the first one's just a little over 1. These others are 2-year-olds, so from 2 to roughly 5, 100 questions an hour. So Michelle then asked, like, what are the nature of these questions? Are they information seeking, like factual? What's that? Or explanatory, well, how do you make it go over there? Versus non-informative seeking, asking attention for attention, or to do something. Can you fix this? Or permission? Can we go outside? So I'll pause again for 15, 20 seconds, and what do you think is the mix between information seeking and non-information seeking? Is it 50-50? Is one more than the other? Is information seeking more? Is non-information seeking more? So 91% of these questions starting out when the infants first starting to talk are information seeking. The parents like, I can't wait till my child talks. And then when they start talking like all of these questions, my goodness. So it goes down a little bit, but it's still at 71%. So the majority from 2 to 5 years of age are still information seeking. So again, how often do you think parents give answers? 20%, 40%, 50%? So the answer here is almost 80% of questions are answered by the parents of the 1.5 to 2-year-olds. And again, it goes down a little bit, but not usually. It's still more than 50, 70, 78, 79, 70%. So what happens when parents do not answer children's questions? Do they give up? Nope. Children persist until they get an answer. And typically, children start with a factual question like, what is that? And if parents simply tell them, then the conversation is over. But if parents answer, engage in these feedback loops, thinking about, well, why is my child asking me this question? What do I think they already know? How can I engage them in a back and forth feedback loop? When that happens, the children are actually learning a lot more. So for Michelle Chouinard, she says, children ask questions when they have gaps, inconsistencies, and problems in their knowledge. Parents give answers, but when they don't, children persist. Back and forth exchanges move from fact to explanation, so a deeper understanding if you do these feedback loops. Young children's questions, she argued, are powerful tools for gathering information and advancing cognitive development. And, where does science fit in? All science inquiry starts with a question or a problem that they're interested in solving. if one sort of reviews all the research that's referred to as the learning sciences, what the foundation pillars are for learning, if you want to maximize opportunities for high quality learning to occur, what should you be doing? What are these foundational things? You should engage the learner in active learning that's both physical and mental. So they're manipulating things, they're engaging things, as you can see from these pictures, but also they're not just engaging physically, they're thinking about what they're doing. You should be engaging them in goal-directed activities that has meaningful to be learned concepts in a context where they socially interact with others. You don't see anybody here learning by themselves, they learn together. And again, science provides all these features, drawing upon young children's natural curiosity and motivation to make sense of their world. You know, they want to know what's alive, what are the properties of all the objects I come in contact, what's this world in which I live, the technology that shows up. You know, I stick my hands under the water and comes out. Toilets flush by themselves. You know, there's street lights that automatically go from green to yellow to red and so forth. So if you think about these theories, what are their implications for learning? It's provide stimulating environments for active exploration, guide exploration into this zone of proximal development, encourage children to ask questions, provide goal-directed experiences that focus on concept development, involve meaningful, active, engaging materials that can be explored in socially interactive ways, and move from factual knowledge to in-depth understanding. And again, all of these come naturally during science experience because kids are trying to make sense of their world, what's alive, properties of objects, the world I live in, the engineering and technology I come in contact with. The other aspect about science, and we have an entire chapter in our preschool to elementary school science and engineering consensus volume on integrating. So science is a way of integrating multiple learning domains, and the reason why it's somewhat critical is that both in early childhood and in the early elementary grades, language and literacy is the curriculum bully. It takes up so much time. There's no time for any other areas to be covered. And as it turns out, when you're doing science and engineering or other activities, the language comes in automatically and it's meaningful because it's about what the children are very interested in, you know, sense making. So if you think about like these domain general skills, you know, like approaches to learning and executive function that support learning across all domains. They're modifiable. So there's obviously individual differences, but you can modify them. They're not set in stone. They promote school readiness. You know, there's a big focus on executive function and how it promotes other areas. They apply to lifelong learning. And there's a lot of research evidence that science supports the development of these important skills in a bi-directional way. So when you're doing science and executive function or approaches to learning together, both benefit more than they would be so if they would be done by themselves. If you think about some of these more domain-specific skills like vocabulary, you get a hands-on experience that map novel words into your direct experience. For math, the measuring, comparing more or less adds precision to children's understanding of their world. Emotional management, it's frustrating when your tower falls down. Remember, friends, we are working together to try and solve the problem. Conflict resolution, empathy, let's take a deep breath and listen to each other's plans. You know, so all of these areas benefit from doing them with a context in which the kids are motivated and interested, which is, you know, the science and learning about sense making in the world that they live. One last discussion before we talk about the center. Instructional support is part of something called the class, which has high dominance in infant, toddler, preschool, and the elementary grades. The study I'm going to report occurred when there was a separate infant, a separate toddler, and a separate preschool version of the class. I'm actually an advisor for Teachstone, so the infant and toddler one is now being combined, and preschool is now being combined with the early elementary grades. But if you look at the preschool one, you end up seeing the importance of going from initially just relational climate to emotional support, and then the classroom organization, the behavioral management, the productivity, how learning is structured, and then this instructional support, which is concept development, quality of feedback, and language modeling. And the emotional support and classroom organization generally are pretty high. These are rated on a 7-point scale, and they're typically emotional support usually up near 6, because teachers, they're not being teachers because they think they're going to become super wealthy. It's because they love children. They want to help children. They want to be in these contexts. That's very high. Class organization is not quite as high. It's still in, the 5 to 6 point range, which is high, average, and the initial of the high area. But concept development, moving away from rote learning, focusing on concept, having these feedback loops, modeling high quality language, that's very low. That's like 2 to 3, sometimes not even above 2. And what we ended up doing was from one of my former grad students, who's actually now at EDC and part of this project, was to look at teacher-directed activities to see if there are certain activities in which this higher instructional support and science are occurring. Because during teacher-directed activities, teachers are focusing on building skills. They're more likely to encourage verbal participation, extended feedback, and so forth. So what we did is we took 4 typical teacher-directed activities. Storybook reading, we gave them a developmentally appropriate storybook, which we knew they hadn't read to their class. We told them, look it over as much as you want, but we want to videotape the first time you read it. We said, do a typical science lesson, choose anything you want. A typical math lesson, typical circle time. Let us know when you're going to do each of these things, and we'd like to videotape them. So we videotaped them, and then we scored them. We have myself and others that are class coders. And what we found was no significant differences between any of these activities for emotional support and classroom organization. And you can sort of see they're all relatively high, regardless of the activity. But when you look at the instructional support when they're doing science, what you find is all 3 dimensions of instructional support are higher, significantly higher, when the teachers are doing a science-based learning experience. And these were not high-quality science. These teachers were not part of a science intervention, so the quality of the science was not that great. But at the same time, as you can see, science, even when they're not doing high quality science, they have a tendency to focus on concepts, to introduce new language, to ask children questions and engage in these feedback loops. So as a summary for why science learning is critical in early childhood, it provides a context for implementing best practices for teaching and learning. It's about a child's immediate world. It draws upon their curiosity about how their world works. It involves hands-on, minds-on, goal-directed, collaborative approaches, right, which produces high engagement, motivation, and interest. It is a process for answering questions, which promotes high-order thinking skills, and it promotes, ideally, learning across multiple domains. If you do more of these things at once, if you focus on science engineering activities and engage the kids in new language development and working together and resolving conflicts and dealing with frustration. And it's, again, a context for high quality adult-child interactions. So I want to switch my last 5 or 10 minutes to our Center for Advancing Elementary Science through Assessment, Research, and Technology. This is a brief paragraph about how we're going to directly respond to NGSS. We're going to address this nationwide gap in the availability of high quality, both science instruction and assessment for young children in any early grades. We're not going to just do this in isolation, but connect and build on existing networks of researchers, leaders, practitioners, and at the state, the district, the school level, to engage in research and to share information generated through these activities. And our approach addresses several questions that together hopefully will provide insight how to measure student science learning and provide evidence about whether interventions related to high quality integrated science and literacy curricula sustain over multiple years and improve students' science learning as well as other areas. Briefly, these are the major components of what we're doing. It's not everything, but right now there's a landscape study going on that starts at preschool. It looks at what's already available. What are the kinds of assessments that are out there? There are measurement studies in which we're doing some at the University of Miami. UCLA is doing some. EDC is supporting us in all of that work. There will be an impact study in which there will be an RCT with kindergarten and first graders. We're using an integrated science and literacy curriculum created by one of our partners at Lawrence Hall of Science. And we'll be doing national leadership, capacity building, and outreach across the entire elementary school space. So in my last few minutes, I'm going to talk about the work that we're doing on our science assessments at the University of Miami by improving assessments for science through technology. UCLA is also using technology, but I don't have time to cover what they're doing. We can say a little bit about what that particular is. But what I'm going to, and my team at University of Miami is taking the lead on, is taking a assessment that we've already developed that was funded by an IES measurement grant entitled Lens on Science, which is a computer adaptive assessment for preschool age children that is administered using touchscreen technology. It produces interval level measurement ability scores. And under the new IES Science Center, we are going to be extending this preschool assessment to kindergarten, first and second grade to create a developmental continuum for assessing science learning through item development and field testing that we'll do, and then they'll be used in the RCT. And once developed, this can be used to assess science learning anywhere from preschool through second grade. This is sort of what it looks like. Children sit in front of a touchscreen laptop, iPad. They're wearing headphones, so there's no assessor. They hear a prompt. So the top picture, which is a strawberry and an ice cube, is shown first all by itself. They'll hear what will happen when this ice cube is heated. Then they'll see the three pictures. They learn they can only touch a picture that has a box around it, touch the picture of what will happen. And in the assessment, they are not told whether they're correct or incorrect. They get a generic sort of good job paying attention. Let's see what's next. And the way the assessment is set up is you're given an item. If you get it right, you're jumped to a harder item, and we can control how much we jump them. If they get that right, they get jumped to a much harder item until they make an error. If they get the first one wrong, they're jumped down to an easier item, and that happens until they get one right. So within 3 or 4 trials, every student and child has a correct and an incorrect. And the reason you need that is if they never make an error, you can't estimate their ability. It's infinity. If they never get one right, that's minus infinity. So you quickly need to get them to a point where you can start using a maximum likelihood estimator to estimate their ability along with a standard error. And then they're going to get items right around their ability level. And that way, every single item, unlike, a fixed format test where some items are too easy, some items are too hard for some children, every single item is right around their ability level. So in the context of, say, 35 or so items, they're going to get a score with a relatively low standard error, highly reliable score. And again, that's a parameter that we have control over that we can estimate. So what are some of the advantages of doing it this way? Well, it's obviously shorter administration time, but it selects items that provides maximal amount of information about each child's ability, achieving a reliable score using fewer items. We don't have to worry about assessor biases or costs to train assessors because everything is done directly with the child. We have adults in the room who set up the laptops or the iPads. If the child stops responding after a couple repetitions of the assessment, a green balloon appears so that the adult in the room knows the child is not responding, goes over like, why aren't you continuing to do this? Typically what happens is the kids find this to be like a game. It's fun for them, so they're more likely to complain that it's over than to stop responding, early on in the middle of it. And again, its advantage is customizable and flexible. Each child gets a customized set of items, response to their ability level. You can repeat assessments multiple times across the school year because they don't always get the same items. The software chooses 10 items closest to their ability and picks one. They're not always going to get the same ones. The item bank can be extended over a time and expanded, allowing flexibility and not only continued improvement, but our ability to extend this, into from preschool into the kindergarten, first and second grade. And these quickly are some of the components. There's a linked English and Spanish version. We call this Salsa. So we have a cute little Salsa dancer software application for Lens on Science assessment. You can go into the system and preview each item. What does each item look like? How does it play? There's no adult assessor required. There's a screener to make sure the child understands the instructions and how to interact with the software, and they have to pass the screener. You can, if you want, to run some number of items in random order if you want everyone to get the same items and you're worried about order effects. If you're trying to create an assessment that requires an order, you're priming or doing something, you can also run a select set of items in a sequential order. You can run this adaptively, where it selects items based on a trial-by-trial estimate of the child's ability level that's calculated in milliseconds. It identifies both the child from the data file and populates the child demographics, so you don't have to fool around figuring out who's who. So the groups that use this give us an Excel spreadsheet with the information on the kids with their unique ID. So what the software does, it looks up the unique ID and displays. It doesn't say, but displays some of the information to make sure you have the right child. And then you can, once you have the wrong child, do the pull down menu and find the child. The demographic information is saved in a back-end server, so it's not something that somebody can copy. And system automatically creates output files for both the items, so we can assess how well the items are working, and for the child, organized in this secure back-end Microsoft relational database in tables. And in that relational database, you can use SQL Server language and Power BI to create scripts to output the data for review, reports in any fashion, or want to put the data into various statistical packages for analysis. These front-end and back-end tools help you go into the database. And obviously, it's secure. Not everyone is allowed to go in and do that. So I'm going to finish with a couple of quick takeaways. There are clearly concerted national efforts supporting research and relevant theory to make science and engineering education a much greater focus of early childhood education, starting in infancy up into the elementary grades, where it's just not happening. So despite these efforts, progress has been slow, and we are just not there yet. So next steps are to continue our focus on birth to 5 and to use this new science R&D center to have a greater focus on the elementary grades and doing it in a way that creates this coherent alignment from early childhood into the elementary grades. That's one of the recommendations of our report. And we can involve a number of you who are interested, so stay tuned to how you can be involved. I would like you, if you have a point, maybe not now, but how did my presentation connect to what you already know and do? What new ideas did you get that extend or push your thinking in new directions? And what might be a challenge for you? What questions, wonderings, and puzzles do you have now? So thank you. Questions? These are links to our websites, to CAESART and to the Early Science Initiative, which is the Birth to 5 work.
Daryl, there is a question. I don't know if you'd like me to read it out in case you can't see it, because you're presenting. It says, I guess it's maybe you can answer in relation to the lens at least. You're working in KN1. The NGSS expects 3D instruction, three-dimensional instruction and three-dimensional assessments. How do the items reflect the 3 dimensions? And are they estimating ability levels based on students' performance on previous items? And how is language accounted for in the assessments, everyday to sophisticated science language?
So that's really a excellent multi part question. So let's see if maybe if I stop share, I can see the chat, but I'll try to remember each part. So there's a challenge in making the items three-dimensional because ideally you would want to watch the child demonstrate their ability to engage in practices and cross-cutting concepts, but that is very time consuming, and uh, it would be difficult to do in a large scale. So what we have done, oh, I see the chat just showed up. What we have done is we have tried to organize the items, and we have both um, internal review. So we have an internal review team in Miami that's creating the items and reviewing them, and each item that gets reviewed gets coded across those 3 dimensions. So what is the content area? And we have just like NGSS, we have a focus on the 3 main content areas with engineering and technology embedded into some of them. We believe that in order to answer the question, you have to engage in thinking about a cross-cutting concept, and that you will have engaged in this practice. You're just not memorizing some piece of information to be able to correctly answer it. And then what we do is we send these out to an independent group of reviewers who review and send us feedback as to the degree that they agree with how we've categorized these items. And then we end up actually collecting data. So we use the Lens platform where we can take a subset of items and administer them to every single child in a random orientation. So everyone gets in a different order. So they get an anchor set of items that have already been proven to be effective for a slightly younger age. And then we introduce like we have an anchor set for preschool. And then we take new items we created for kindergarten that have gone through this review process. And the kindergartners get the anchor item set first. And then they get roughly 50 or so of the new items in random order. And we collect enough data so every child is getting this, every kindergarten child would be getting the same 50 or so items. And then we do sophisticated, if we have a measurement person that is part of our team who does sophisticated analysis to look at what are the item characteristics. You know, I can't give you all the details, but if you want, we could send you what those are. And then we also do item bias. We look to see whether differential item functioning. We do item bias to see if any items are biased. And then as the items are being used, they are maintained in a database for the items, and we periodically review the items to sort of see if they're working. I don't have any that I brought with me, but if you remember the one that shows the strawberry, the basic notion is that a child is not memorizing that a strawberry was sitting in an ice cube out in the sun, and what happens when you do that, the water melts. They probably are not memorizing it. The basic notion is that they have engaged in having things. They've done some amount of engagement in planning and carrying out investigations, or noticing. I'm sitting here with my ice cream cone. I'm slowly licking it. It's melting on my hand. My hand feels warm. So the whole notion that there is stability and change in the property of various sorts of objects as a function of cause and effect. So they've hopefully engaged in some sort of practice in which they're noticing and planning melting things. Some kids will take a, magnifying glass and try to burn something or try to burn an ant or something. So the basic idea, and again, we can't prove that this is the case, but we sort of are inferring that you're not going to be able to answer this question unless you're thinking about cause and effect, stability and change, engaging in this sort of a practice to know that what will happen is the strawberry is not going to change its color, and it's not going to just stay there, but rather the ice is going to be uh, have its state change because of the heat of the sun, and it's going to turn into water, but the ice cube will just maintain its structure because the ice cube, is not going to melt. So that's so we go through that sort of reasoning with every single item, and they're coded, in terms of what do we think is what's the content, what's the practice, what do we think is the relevant cross-cutting concept, and then hopefully over time with review and data collection and item analysis, uh, items that just for whatever reason stop working, we can get rid of them or modify them. Was there another part to that question? I see I can pull down the chat.
Yes. How is language accounted for in the assessments?
So
And
yeah.
yeah,
So what we try to do is we try to engage language that's relevant to what's happening in the science learning that occurs, and not make this about like memorizing, definition of terms, but understanding concepts that you would learn in context. And clearly, there's no way to eliminate language, right? The language, there's a correlation of roughly zero point 0.5, zero point 0.6 between the student scores on a language assessment and their scores on the science. So there is some correlation, but we try to really think about what ideally in a curriculum is the language that gets presented. I'll give you one really quick example. At our we have a high quality center that's part of the Educare Learning Network. There's one in Miami, and we have a phenomenal garden in the back. And the toddlers, like the 2-year-olds, would go out in the backyard and I mean into the garden, and what they noticed was a spider that created a spider web. And when they would go out to see it, on some days the spider web is there with the spider on it. Some days the spider is not there, but there's flies that are trying to get off, and they can't. And they're very curious, like, what's going on? What is this about? So what the toddler teacher did, she took those flexible bands that physical therapy use, to get you stretched to stretch your muscles, and created a life-size spider web for the kids to play in. And I have a videotape of this. And the kids, they're playing, and she's in there with them. And what she ends up doing, she has one of the child is playing with one of the fibers. And she says to the child, I want you to look carefully. I want you to pull down and let go. What do you see happening? It goes up and down, it vibrates, it's flexible. So if you're looking like at the class score, she's getting high instructional support because what she's doing, she's introducing language to the child that's highly relevant to that little girl's sort of seeing what's actually happening, right? What does she see? This string is going up and down, it's bouncing up and down, and she's introducing the word, it's flexible. It vibrates. So what we try to do is really get a sense of like what should be the language that's being introduced. And we try not to like, did you memorize this word, but use some of the science language in the context of getting a sense of do children understand concepts, right? It's not memorizing a word. I mean, like sink and float. You know, little kids, start in a bathtub, and some of the stuff goes down to the bottom, some stays at the top. They're curious. There's lots of ways to explore, why certain things go down, certain things go up. And it's very easy to like, anything that stays at the top, we're going to call that float. If it goes down, we're going to call that sink. And those are relevant terms for the kids because, that's the concept they're trying to understand. So they end up using those terms. So there's no perfect way, to separate them, but at the same time, we're very thoughtful about how do we keep the language such that it's relevant for both science learning and ideally for, learning language, and learning to read as well.
Great, thanks, Daryl. And there was only one additional question. You only have a minute left about whether the items are meant to be curricular agnostic, and I responded that yes, the lens
Yes.
and the other, yes, that the lens and the other measurement assessment that the project is developing are both meant to be curriculum agnostic. And I think that was it as far as the chat questions, Daryl. Thank you so much.
Well, thank all of you for attending. I hope you are now becoming early childhood science and engineering enthusiasts, and that you pay attention and visit our websites. And uh, we have already been charged with doing an RCT with the Lawrence Hall of Science with their Amplify Science, but we're always looking for partners and ways of expanding and doing work. So please contact us. Let us know thoughts and ideas that you have, and it'd be lovely to work with some of you.
Great, thanks, everyone.
Have a nice evening. Enjoy your dinner.
Bye.